All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. Joined once again tonight by a good friend of mine, Mark Jenkins. Mark, how are you doing this evening, man?
Doing good, Will. How's it going with you, bro?
I am doing great. Like I told you via text messages the other day, man, I am simply chomping at the bit, and I have been chomping at the bit to talk about this subject that we're going to talk about tonight. And I hope for anybody who checks this out, you really enjoy what we are talking about. What we're going to talk about right now is this conversation that has been thrown around for a little bit, most recently on the Pat McAfee show. And it's something that I think, we really have to focus on. And that's talking about a possible merger between the Big East and Atlantic Coast conferences for basketball. And of course, like I said, it was recently brought up on, the Pat McAfee show, First Take, you name it. And it's one of those things that is not going away anytime soon because several months ago, former Duke head basketball coach, the great Mike Krzyzewski, talked about the need for the Big East and the ACC to merge. And you have to wonder, could it happen? And more importantly, would it work? We're talking about the ACC having 17 members. We're talking about the Big East having 11 members. Would anybody really want to see a 28-team basketball league? I mean, we have that already. It's called the NBA, you know, but nonetheless, would anybody really want to see that at the collegiate level?
So my take on this is, I kind of see the purpose of it both ways. I think, if they do decide to go on this journey, I definitely don't see 28 teams making the travel. And what I mean by that is I kind of see this being a situation where, in the words of the late great Macho Man Randy Savage, the cream's going to rise to the top. And I think that if they do make this, go through, I see some of the lower level teams, and I don't want to call them lower level, but some of the JV kind of teams in both conferences kind of being pushed to the wayside. And I could see them possibly doing some type of maybe, let's say 16, 18 team kind of super conference to kind of combat the Big Ten and the SEC. I mean, we look at what the SEC did this year in basketball is just
And what they're still doing,
unbelievable.
and what they're still doing.
Yeah, getting that amount of teams, into the tournament is just crazy. So I think, the Big East and the ACC kind of said, hey, we used to run basketball. If you think about this, those were where you were getting a lot of your Final Four teams, a lot of your national championship teams from those two conferences in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And now, that's not the same anymore because with NIL especially going, crazy, the SEC, the Big Ten now, they've got these football deep pockets that they can now spread the love to basketball a little bit more. And that's why we're seeing those two conferences kind of taking over in basketball, so to speak. So, this is like you said, like we were talking about before, this is going to be a fun topic to kind of bounce around for 90 minutes, whatever the case may be, because this
Mhm.
is this is amazing stuff that we're going to say. And like I said, I can see the point both ways. But one thing I will kind of pass this back to you that I really do like, I kind of like the fact that we're going to get some of those old Big East rivalries back if that does happen, because so many of the quality Big East teams kind of defected to the ACC once the whole Big East was kind of falling apart before it completely imploded, um, you know, 15 years ago. So I'm intrigued by Syracuse getting a chance to, square off with the likes of Georgetown and UConn once again.
Honestly, I really don't see it working. And the reason is this is because if you want to take the best of the best from both leagues, what about the football members from the ACC? Okay, that's one thing. Then, the other thing is there's still a lot of hurt feelings, within that Big East room. And the reason is this: with Boston College and Syracuse leaving, and of course, Syracuse flirted with the ACC in the early 2000s before just like sticking with the Big East. And then Boston College did leave with Miami and Virginia Tech. It hurt because they were part of the originals of that
Yeah.
league. Okay. And then you had Pitt, who left as well. And the thing is, of the 17 members in the ACC right now, seven of them were in the Big East at some point. Okay. It's one of those where I feel that the ACC needs the Big East more than the Big East needs the ACC. And here's why. You look back, and the Big East, to their credit, they've been able to roll with the punches because once all this stuff went down with Syracuse and Pitt deciding to leave the Big East in 2011, of course, it was 2013 officially. And of course, Rutgers went to the American before going to the Big Ten. Louisville went to the American before going to the ACC. West Virginia went to the Big 12, you name it. The Big East just said, you know what? Screw it. We're going to get back to our roots, which is basketball. So the seven Catholic schools that did remain were like, you know what? Let's get the three best Catholic schools that we can find that have solid basketball programs, and let's go forward. And of course, they brought in Creighton, they brought in Xavier, and oh my gosh, I'm having a senior moment right now. Please forgive me as far as that other team that came in when the Big East had a 10-team league starting in 2013. But nonetheless, it's one of those where they focused on basketball, they got back to basketball, and they're having success with it. Yeah, it was Creighton, it was Xavier, and it was Butler. Okay, please forgive me on that. And then of course they brought Connecticut back, and the thing with Connecticut was Connecticut basically got kicked out. It's not like Connecticut left because, they went to the American, which was basically Conference USA slash the old Big East. All right. Um, and to their credit, UConn was like, you know what? It ain't working for us here because, we got to play Temple. Okay, fine. But you got East Carolina, Houston, Tulsa, all of the stuff. It was not working. UConn just said, you know what? We're going to be a football independent. Let's get back to our roots, which is basketball. And of course, when you think about Connecticut athletics, you don't think about their football program. You think about their men's basketball program, and of course, their women's basketball program. And that's a rarity where you could say, you know what, the women's program has actually won more than the men's. You know what I'm saying? So they've gotten back to that focus, and they've started having success again, both in men's and women's basketball. It's just one of those. First and foremost, I think there's already too many mouths to feed, in the ACC as it is. You got 17 teams or 17 schools. And I think the ACC, they're trying to keep up with the Joneses, but every time that they keep up with the Joneses, it does not work. I mean, you think about it. You've got a 16 team SEC, the Blue Bloods. You've got an 18-team Big Ten, the Blue Bloods. The ACC, they're trying to hold on because they're still worried about, maybe a Florida State or Clemson leaving. So let's bring in an SMU, let's bring in a Cal, let's bring in, a Stanford, simply trying to hold on. And it just, to me, it's not working out for that league right there. Like I said, I feel like the ACC, they need the Big East more than the Big East needs the ACC because the Big East they've gotten back to their strong suit, which is basketball. Is the basketball money anywhere near the football money? Absolutely not. And see, honestly, I don't see everybody, being on board with it. I could understand where people are coming from the money standpoint. Rick Pitino has been on both sides of this argument because I remember when the original Big East went under. I remember him talking at that last Big East tournament in 2013, and he said, and that was when the decision was made that hey, the remaining basketball schools, the Catholic schools, they were going to keep the Big East name, keep the history, and focus going forward. And he said, you know what, bravo, because they've been disrespected for far too long. Because in those days, it was two media deals that they were getting from ESPN. They were getting a media deal for basketball, and then they were getting a media deal for football. So now they got back to their focus. And the Big East in like 12 years or so, they've thrived. since since they parted with football, because you figure they've had multiple deals network wise with Fox. Now you have NBC Peacock into the mix, and you also have games on CBS. And then on top of that, since 2016, no conference has won more national championships than the Big East. The ACC, you're talking about a 17-team basketball league that is struggling to get four teams into the tournament. And right now, it's only Duke that's left. Everybody else, I mean, Carolina did win a playing game, but everybody else, nobody got out of the round of 64. You know what I'm saying? Clemson was done by Monique State. Louisville lost a de facto home game to Creighton. And then, of course, North Carolina lost to Ole Miss. So it's one of those where I just look at the ACC and it's like all of those programs that they brought in, all of those former Big East programs that they brought in, it hasn't worked out. Miami football used to be dominant. What have they done since they went to the ACC? You look at all of these former Big East schools. Syracuse. What has Syracuse really done basketball wise since they've been in the ACC? They did get to a Final Four back in 2016, but that was as I think like a 10 or 11 seed. You know what I'm saying? They haven't done anything since. Boston College hasn't made the tournament since 2009. And you think back to when BC was in the Big East, they were there like every year, if not every other year. And it's the same thing for Pitt. So I think you got to be careful what you ask for. And I think the people, I would imagine the people that are still in that Big East room are looking from the basketball brand standpoint and saying, hey, look at our guys and what happened to them on Tobacco Road. It ain't working out, man.
No, and to your point, that's the thing that I think is, going to have to really come clear in the coming weeks, months, or however long this may take for it to either be, come to fruition or be put to bed. And what I mean by that is basically like what's going to happen is, are we just talking strictly basketball? Are we talking all sports? Are we talking, hey, if we give you a bump with basketball like the ACC needs, because you're absolutely right there, the ACC needs them more than they need the ACC from a basketball point of view. So if we are just going to keep it basketball, are some other funds going to get allocated from something else to other sports to help
Right.
strengthen our programs in other sports? Like, we really going to have to see all the parameters of this before we can really say, you know, is it going to work for both? Is it going to work for one or the other? Because, at the end of the day, anytime we're talking big business, it's going to have to be mutually beneficial for both sides.
Absolutely.
So the Big
Absolutely.
East is going to have to get some type of kickback or something for them to even consider this. Like you said, from the ACC standpoint and a basketball stance, this is definitely going to strengthen the conference. And we're really getting to a point now. If you really look at what's going on, we went from, originally when the whole BCS system was created, there was a power six, and then we went down to a power five. We're kind of heading towards a power four because basically, again, like I said, the Big Ten,
We're there now, you know.
yeah, yeah, we're basically there now, and the ACC and Big East with them coming together, I think the ACC is really trying to pitch to the Big East, hey, this is the only way we're going to stand a chance. Otherwise, there's going to be a possibility that we start getting teams poached from our conferences to go to these conferences to the point where they're just going to be bigger and bigger. At the end of the day, I ultimately see all of these big conferences kind of rounding out at 20 and
Hmm.
basically doing some sort of north, south, east, west kind of split to kind of break it up to where basically you're going to have 80, the top 80 schools in basketball and football basically being housed in these four conferences.
Right.
Now, the only thing is, we know the Big 12's kind of that other one kind of hanging on because of basically what they've done with poaching the Pac 12. So, it's basically going to be the ACC and the Big East are going to really have to come to a reality. And this is going to have to be, I don't know if they're going to do market research or if the ADs are actually going to really have a come to Jesus moment and figure this out and say,
Hmm.
hey, where are we going to kind of stand when all the dust settles with all of this realignment and shifting and everything 5, 10 years from now? Are we going to find ourselves kind of on the other side of the fence, peeking in, wishing that we got to the party a little bit sooner? Or are we going to try to figure something out? Again, like I said, it's going to have to be mutually beneficial for both sides. Like, because basically, what the Big East is doing basketball wise, like you said, they've rebuilt their brand based on what they originally wanted to do. And they've gotten to the point where it's big time basketball again, it's successful again. And the ACC is like, hey, we don't have that anymore. Like, we've got two of the original blue bloods in our conference. And if it isn't for those guys, Carolina and Duke, like, we're not seeing any type of Final Four action or any type of, championship hopes, preseason hoopla, none of that stuff. I mean, Syracuse is just a debacle of what they used to be. Boston College debacle of what they used to be. And a lot of that is them leaving the Big East. So ACC's probably hoping, hey, not only are we going to get a boost from those top basketball schools in the Big East, maybe hopefully the fountain of rejuvenation can kind of kick on for Syracuse, for VA Tech, for Boston College, for those teams that used to perennially be good in basketball, Pitt as well. So I'm thinking that, they're hoping it's a little bit of something like that. And again, for the Big East, football is king. And I'm pretty sure that they're hoping they're going to get some type of kickback, some type of something from football. If it's not a piggyback necessarily for their basketball schools to kind of strengthen a football program, it's something where, hey, X amount of your football dollars are going to have to be allocated to our programs for whatever the hell we want to use it for.
I mean, I don't see a full-on merger. I mean, I could be wrong. I would not be surprised if there was some form of partnership, like they work together. Just switching gears to football real quick. When the Pac-12 looked like they were still going to have stability, I know there was talk between the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big 12 as far as having an alliance. Because the Big Ten and the SEC had their alliance, and they're like, "Hey, let's work together." I could totally see something like that happening, and I'm going to throw out an idea right here. If you're the ACC and the Big East, okay, I know we already have the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and I know you got the Big East Big Ten Challenge. How about an ACC, first and foremost, how about an ACC Big East Challenge? Because we used to have it back in the day, okay? I mean, way back in the day. Um, and what you do is you have maybe all the teams in the conference play each other like 3 times a year, okay? That's number one. Number two, make 3 of those games your marquee games. And I'm talking about you got one at the Garden, you got one in Greensboro, at the Greensboro Coliseum, because that's an historic building for the ACC.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you go to Washington, D.C., and you have another game. And, you showcase in those neutral site games, you showcase your best programs, your Villanovas, your Connecticut's, your St. John's, okay, your Dukes, your North Carolinas, and so forth. Because the thing with the ACC, they are in a unique situation where less truly is more. You think back for the Big East last real ditch effort to save football. Yeah, they saved football, but honestly, they made their basketball conference that much stronger when they brought in DePaul, when they brought in Louisville, when they brought in Marquette, when they brought in Cincinnati, and I forgot who the other team is that they brought in from Conference USA. And I was like, I just sat back and watched this. I'm like, wait a minute, they're getting all of that. And this was about 20 years ago or so. This was after BC and Miami decided to leave. And I was like, yo, the Big East is going to be on point for, for basketball. And it was because, I think the highlight of that was the 2011 Big East tournament because that year the Big East set the record at the time, 11 teams that made the NCAA tournament. Connecticut was the 9 seed and they won it. And all of the games that Connecticut lost that year were within the Big East. Connecticut was a 9 seed and they were still ranked. Okay, so that gave you an idea of how deep that the Big East was. the my point is the ACC's adding teams, but it doesn't make sense because you're adding schools. It doesn't make you stronger in football. It doesn't make you stronger in basketball. You look at the SEC when they've added brands. At one point, they used to be a 10-team league. Okay, they brought in Arkansas, which was the beginning of the end for the Southwest Conference, and they added South Carolina. Okay, no big deal at that point. But then you bring in A&M and Missouri. But I think the game changer for the SEC was bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. And I mean, you've got brands, and it's the same thing for the Big Ten. The Big Ten have looked at both markets and brands. Okay, Rutgers is close enough to the New York City area for us to get that market. Maryland's close enough to the Washington D.C. area for us to get that market. Okay, you bring in Nebraska, which I know Nebraska's has not had success in quite some time, but still football wise, they're a brand. And then of course, USC and UCLA are football brands. UCLA is also a basketball brand. You get the LA market, and then of course you bring in Oregon and Washington as well. You can't just add stuff to a meal just to say, you're adding stuff to a meal. You have to add stuff to a meal that makes it make sense. And that has been the biggest issue with the ACC. When the Big East said, you know what, screw football, let's focus on basketball. They brought in programs that made sense. If they wanted to make it keep it a Catholic thing, they could have simply said, you know what, let's bring in LaSalle, let's bring in Iona, let's bring in St. Bonaventure. No, and there's no disrespect to those schools, but they said, you know what, let's bring in brands. And you figure Creighton, they've gotten to the NCAA tournament almost every year. I think they got to the Elite Eight 2 years ago, got jerked in that game against San Diego State, holding the story for another day. And then they brought in Butler. Butler hasn't had the success since they got to the Big East, but you're talking about a team. They still had back-to-back Final Fours in 2009, 2010, and Xavier as well. And of course, Xavier just lost Sean Miller again, but nonetheless, Xavier's been a perennial tournament team. And when you think about Xavier, you think about it as a basketball school. That is what has helped the Big East because they have some form of direction. They have a plan. The ACC, I don't see a plan right there. And for me, football wise, that's what's hurting them against the Big 12, uh, the Big 10, and the SEC. There's no plan there. And the same thing for basketball. I mean, you look at it, the Big 12 and Big 10 each have four schools in the Sweet 16. The SEC, of course, has seven. And then there's the ACC hoping and praying that Duke and Cooper can carry that flag, no pun intended. But you know what? That's basically where they're at, man. And it's one of those for me, again, like I said before, I just feel like the Big East needs the ACC more than the ACC. The ACC rather needs the Big East more than the Big East needs the ACC. There's simply no plan, but it's just like I just feel like the ACC is just always lagging behind. You look at the college football playoff this past December. The ACC did get two bids. They got the last two bids, and it's like they were basically fighting, scrapping, and clawing just to get those two bids into the playoff. You look at it again this year; they got four bids in the last couple of years. The Big East has gotten more bids than the ACC. Granted, the ACC has been able, to get some teams to the Final Four. NC State got there last year. North Carolina got there to the championship game a couple of years ago. Duke was right there as well. Virginia won the national championship back in 2019. So, you do have that. But again, it's just too much unnecessary freight for the uh, uh, for the um, for the ACC. And I think that has and that will continue to be their biggest issue, in my opinion.
Well, you got to look at like this. And when you were just saying what you were saying about like, relocation as far as teams moving from conference to conference, stuff like that. I'm going to use a metaphor here with what I feel the ACC kind of gets stuck with. So, you ever been to supermarket, let's say late the day before Thanksgiving, or like if you're lucky enough to find one, it's like open early, and you go
Right.
in there to try to grab like one last thing that's needed or something like that.
Hmm.
That's basically what the ACC has to deal with when it comes to teams, because SEC has their pick of the litter. And what they're going after is teams that are dually dominant, that have successful programs in not only football, but basketball as well. They've been really cherry picking to make sure. Texas, their basketball program isn't the best right now, obviously, with them, taking that L to Xavier, but they're known for having a basketball program. They've got a superstar dude in the NBA right now in Kevin Durant who, attended there for a year. So they're known for having a program. Same with Oklahoma, not really up right now, but traditionally they've got a pretty solid basketball program. So that's what the SEC is doing. And then the Big Ten is basically saying, well, we're going to go ahead and get the best of the rest that the SEC didn't get, or maybe, they didn't want to go to the SEC, whatever, it didn't work out. That's what the Big Ten's getting. The ACC is basically trying to make that meal like you were talking about with a little bit of leftovers, everything. And sometimes when you're trying to make a meal like that, you're making one of those garbage plates that doesn't seem like stuff necessarily supposed to be together, but you got to figure out some way to put something hot on the plate in front of the family. And that's basically what the ACC is doing.
Hmm.
So what I'm thinking, and a lot of this is their fault because they've been too heavily reliant on their two megastars in the world of basketball to carry them. And in football, I mean, it's just a mess every year. Like every year, the ACC in football is just, you don't know what to make of it. For that little small run where Clemson was dominant and, winning national championships, it made a little sense. But since then, and even before then, it's just constantly been an albatross of who knows what. You got conference championships, championship teams with 9-4 records. It's just terrible. It's not a good brand of football. It's not fun to watch. So they've got to do something there. I think a lot of this also is going to be from their perspective of looking at this to strengthen their conference is going to help two sides. One, I think with the basketball aspect, I think them now conjoining themselves with these powerhouse teams in these markets they're recruiting good players. Now they're going to hope that some of that trickle down funnels into some of the other schools that are already in the ACC. Because we all know when it comes to the recruiting battles, a lot of times the most fiercest recruiting kind of rivalries are within conferences. It's not a guy considering, if the guy's considering 5 schools, basically, guarantee you 2 of those schools are in the same conference. And that's where the recruiting gets hot and heavy. So I think that the ACC is looking at that is okay, this is going to open up the floodgates for our entire conference to possibly get better recruits because now, we're going to be competing with the likes of, St. John's, with UConn, with those powerhouse Big East schools to now maybe trickle down some more top players in the conference instead of them going to a Big Ten school or an SEC school or maybe even a smaller school. I think that's what they're thinking from that aspect, one. And then from the football aspect, I'm thinking, hey, if we get a boost on the basketball side as far as recruits, as far as ratings, as far as more attention, now that's going to ultimately help our football as well. Because as we all know, those two sports are so kind of intertwined when it comes to media attention that if a school is kind of hot for one thing, now all of a sudden they're going to get recruits from that other sport to possibly consider because hey, this program is now in the light. So now this program's in the light of football. So now if I'm a blue chip athlete coming up 16, 17 years old, maybe I can be the one to spark an interest in the other program to get things going. So I think that's what they're kind of thinking from
Hmm.
their side. And I think that's why they're pushing for it. And they would be a fool not to push for this because, again, like I said, if they don't do something, they're going to, it's slowly but surely, they're going to be extinct. Now,
No.
the Big East,
Hmm.
for them, again, it's got to be all financial because, again, anytime you're considering a merger, somebody's taking some dead weight somewhere
Right.
because anytime there's a merger, one company is probably not doing as well as the other company. There are few far in between situations where the merger is equally beneficial for both. Perfect
Hmm.
example, the TKO deal with UFC and WWE.
WWE.
Both
Right.
companies are through the roof right now in popularity. So that was an equally beneficial merger. This
Right.
situation wouldn't be one of those. So the Big East has got to be taken, they've got to be getting some type of major financial ramifications. And what I'm thinking is that this is only going to deepen their pockets for stuff like NIL and stuff like just being able to make things happen and exposure to get even more top level talent to now not necessarily getting the 4-star recruits, so to speak, but maybe now starting to get some of those 5-star blue chippers as well. Maybe now, maybe a Cooper Flag now would consider a St. John's or a UConn over a Duke because they're in the same category as a Duke, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it like this. I mean, you figure the big boys of the ACC, when I'm talking about big boys of the ACC, I mean Duke and Carolina, they're going to get kids from wherever,
Mhm.
regardless. But the rest of the schools there, they're caught up in the wash. And to give you an idea of how the ACC is viewed, of the Power Four leagues this year, the ACC is the only league that had schools within its conference who finished with winning records within the league, and they did not make the NCAA tournament. They are the only one. Okay, you look at it. Um, Wake Forest, North Carolina, and SMU all went 13-7 within the ACC. Stanford went 11-9, and of those four teams that I just mentioned, only one of them made the NCAA tournament. You look at the Big East. Okay, the only team that finished with a winning record within the league that did not make it was Villanova, and that was to be expected. Now, in 2024, Seton Hall became the first team in Big East history to win at least 13 games within the conference and not make the NCAA tournament. They finished fourth in the Big East. This year, Xavier and Marquette both went 13-7, and both of them got to the NCAA tournament. And it's just one of those where um, I just feel like the ACC is not looked at, as a strong conference. And I talked about this before, several times, within, from a football aspect. The ACC is teetering because, again, unlike the other three power conferences right now, they don't have their stuff together. And if you look and you study history, all of these leagues that do not have their stuff together, they eventually fall apart. It happened with the Southwest Conference. Okay, it happened with the Big East. It happened with the Pac-12. If you don't have strong leadership, it's not going to work. And right now, I think Val Ackerman is a much stronger leader of her conference than Jim Phillips is for his. He's really, just trying to, you know, it's one of those basically where you're trying to patch a hole in the Titanic, and as you're trying to patch that hole, two or three more holes pop up. And that's
Right.
basically, what's happening to the ACC right now. The schools that they added, it has not worked out. They added Miami to be a football power. It has not been the case. Okay. The Miami has not been the Miami that you and I grew up on. Okay,
Mhm.
and it's one of those where, every time that, college football would love Miami to be consistently relevant, like they once were, but it hasn't been the case. It's the same thing with Florida State. I mean, just to give you an idea of how the ACC is not respected, regardless of the injury, we saw Florida State go undefeated in 2023 and still not make the college football playoff.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So that just gives you an idea of how they're not respected. And again, you had three teams go 13-7 within your league this year in basketball. Only one of them made the NCAA tournament. And the one team that did make it, North Carolina, there was controversy about them getting in. On top of that, They still had to go to Dayton for the round of the playing round just to get to the field of 64. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those where they're just not respected. The Big East is more respected than the Atlantic Coast Conference right now. Like I said, I really don't see a full-on merger because, it's one of those where every time that the Big East added football schools, the basketball schools got ticked off because it's like we're adding freight. Football is not our problem, it's your problem. You need to fix it. And then on top of that, again, you're adding more miles. So, to your point, like you said, from the financial aspect, if you're the ACC and you really sit down and talk turkey with the Big East, you have to give them an offer that they can't refuse. I'll give you a prime example. When I was in college, one year I had a roommate, okay, and I cooked food, he cooked food. We had a kitchen in our room. So if I made food, I knew I was gonna make enough for him, he was gonna make enough for me. We sit down, enjoy a meal, and it was cool. There was this cat that came by and he realized that we had a kitchen. So he tried to sweeten us up and he was like, he was gonna get this girl to come by and make food. And he was like, yeah, yeah, she can make food for all of us. And we just looked at him and we were like, listen, why do I need somebody else to come in here and make food? Because that person's going to want to play the food. And then since it was your idea, you're going to want to play the food. And then myself and my roommate got to eat. So now you're asking me to feed two additional mouths that and for absolutely nothing, and it's not beneficial to me. Okay, and that's basically what the ACC is doing right now. You have to bring something to the table for the Big East that's going to make it beneficial. I think NIL money, the Big East is going to be able to get that because you look at it, Connecticut has enough strong alums and they have enough dedication to their basketball program to make it work. And UConn, for what it's worth, okay, UConn has a stellar class coming in this year. Okay, not to mention with whatever kids they're going to be able to keep. St. John's, I know there's like people want to give Rick Pitino some flack right now because they lost. Listen, they lost, all right, but still, St. John's was a very good team. St. John's is headed in the right direction. Their NIL program is on point because I think this is CEO of one of those beverage companies. Okay, he's a St. John's alum,
Mhm.
and he's been pumping money into the program, and that was one of those things where when Pitino was still at Iona and the folks at St. John's wanted him, he told them explicitly from day one, if you want me, your NIL program has to be on point. So they're committed. Georgetown is starting to turn things around. Villanova, as we speak, they're working on like buyout money to like buy out one of these coaches that was in the NCAA tournament because like they're shooting for the moon for this. I know Xavier just lost Sean Miller to Texas, but some of the names that are being thrown around with that job, it's you know what, Xavier's not going away. And then of course you got Creighton with Greg McDermott, and I put Creighton in that category like Iowa. They get kids from the Midwest that want to go there. Their NIL program has been solid because they were able to get Jemiah Neal to leave Arizona State, a power conference school, to come finish his career at Creighton. They were also able to get Pop Isaacs out there, and I know Pop Isaacs was injured this year, and he was a big loss for Creighton. But nonetheless, so I think the Big East programs, you know, sans like some of the smaller schools like a Providence or like a Seton Hall, they've got it together. You know what I'm saying? And they understand the power of the NILs and like some of those power schools in the Big East, so to speak. They get a jump start now because the portal opened today. I know 500 kids have already put their names in the portal. And listen, we're seeing with this NCAA tournament right now, you got to attack the portal because for everything that we're talking about with the success of the SEC and with the success of the Big Ten, those schools have attacked the portal. And
Oh, absolutely.
you know what I'm saying? So again, man, I ain't trying to sound like a broken record, but like I said before, the ACC needs the Big East more than the Big East needs the ACC, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, to your point with NIL money, with those schools, doing well with NIL money,
Hmm.
everybody knows that, anything sports related is all about an arms race.
Yeah.
So just imagine these boosters that are already pumping in nice amount of funds to a St. John's. I'm not even going to talk about UConn, but let's just say a St. John's, for instance.
Hmm.
Now imagine now in this arms race, now you've got to go up against Duke and Carolina for recruits. The boosters are now going to pump more money into that NIL fund. Now imagine if there's some type of back deal, somewhere in the clause saying each one of the Big East schools has to receive X amount of dollars towards their NIL fund. That's even more money going into that, which is only going to strengthen the recruits.
Hmm.
Now, the reason that the ACC and they're down all across the board in all sports. Baseball, they're still pretty solid. I'll give them that. But the two power sports, they're down. Now, think about this, right? Before the SEC became the monster that it is, let's go back to when the ACC and the SEC were both competitive in football, recruiting, getting all the top recruits. Like they would get all the down south, East Coast recruits, all the down south kind of mid area recruits, once probably stopping around Oklahoma. And then all of that's going to go to, Big 12, Pac 12, that kind of stuff. But they were competitive for the same recruits in football. And then as the years passed, the SEC got stronger and stronger, and to the point where they ultimately got a stranglehold over that area in football with
Yeah.
recruits. And the ACC basically were had to get the leftovers, so to speak. They've messed around and let that happen in basketball now,
Yeah.
because they were still getting, even though they were losing those top recruits in football as the years went on, as we started, getting into the 2010s and so forth and so on, when the ACC really became just super dominant in football. They still were getting those top basketball recruits, but now over the last 5, 6, 7 years now, they're not getting those top recruits. Those tobacco road recruits are now going to SEC schools.
You know why? Because the ACC got away from their roots. Because, yeah, the ACC, like all of the schools in the ACC have a football program. But when you think about the ACC, it's basketball. Okay. And you think about it, yeah, you have Duke and you have North Carolina. They are the kings of that league in basketball. This is not talked about enough, but them losing Maryland to the Big Ten was big
Oh,
because
absolutely. Absolutely.
Maryland was one of their stronger basketball programs. Okay. And then on top of that, you sprinkle in Virginia and, NC State would give you that run every now and then, Wake Forest and stuff like that. And it's not happening no more. It's like it's one of those where I can't even tell you who the last kid was to come out of Wake Forest to
Yeah.
go to the NBA. You know what I'm
But see,
saying?
I don't think it's they got away from basketball. I think it's the SEC is so known to kids now
Hmm.
as a path to the league. And I think now that the SEC has become so dominant in football, it's now a
Hmm.
trickle down effect where they have to be dominant in basketball now, because these kids, you see the SEC and winning teams, these players, I know them, I see them. They're
Right.
almost like pros. Hey, guess what? They send the most people to the pros. So it's a trickle down now. It's basically what I think the ACC is hoping that it's going to do for them in basketball and football by getting the Big East in. And I also think it's what they're pitching to the Big East, saying, hey, we're going to help bolster you in this because of football too, because the two sports, like I said, a little while ago, they're so freaking intertwined right now more than ever. When we were growing up, college football was college football and college basketball was college basketball. And there were very few programs that were consistently good in both.
Right.
Now
It's expected.
they're so intertwined with each other now, where the money, it's all about the money. And now with NIL, it's the wild, wild west. And it's
Right.
going to be even crazier now, to where I'm really like over the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to have 30 schools that are great at both. And all the other schools are kind of floundering around to pick their once every 4 years or once every 5 years where they're relevant in a certain sport. But you're going to have 30 schools that are just going to have a stranglehold over basketball and football.
And that's why, I said this about football. I'm saying it for basketball as well. That's why you need a commissioner. But the problem
Yeah.
is like the thing is like there has to be more structure because the smaller schools, and we're seeing it in this tournament right now, they can't compete with the big boys as far as NIL because basically, that's one of the reasons why we didn't see a lot of upsets this year because all of the kids from the smaller schools have now, moved up and they can't compete. And if if you're at a smaller school and like the best NIL deal that you can give somebody is like Pep Boys or something like that is in comparison to like a Fortune 500 company, they're not going to be able to keep up, and they really need to take a page from the professional ranks with salary caps and luxury tax, everything like that. My point is, it's like it needs to be flat across the board, of saying, listen, this is how much that you could contribute to your NIL program. But good luck telling the people at the top that you know what, you got to take care of the people at the bottom. Okay,
Now, but if they do that, you open up a whole different Pandora's box.
oh,
Now
oh,
you open up, basically what we just kind of got out of people doing stuff under the table and backdoor deals and all
yeah,
types of stuff like
yeah,
that. Your Ricky Rose getting a tractor to the house, he
right,
wasn't supposed to get a tractor,
right.
You open up all of that thing.
Right. No, listen, definitely. And I mean, we talk about, the ACC and the Big East, but I think another big factor that we haven't discussed right now, and this is why I think it wouldn't work. The ACC and Big East are on different networks. And
Yeah.
and that right there is the elephant in the room because the ACC is exclusively with ESPN. The
Mhm.
Big East has deals with CBS, Fox, and NBC. And the unfortunate thing with ESPN, and this is why they can no longer call themselves the worldwide leader of sports, in my opinion, is because if a sport or a league is not covered by ESPN, they don't talk about it. Okay, because the Big Ten doesn't do business with them anymore. They don't talk about the Big Ten like that for football or basketball. Okay, they hardly talk about the Big East, and if they do, it's throwing up topics like this, trying to downplay the Big East, trying to downplay Dan Hurley, who I think is a phenomenal head coach, and I think he's great for college basketball as well. But nonetheless, that right there is another elephant in the room. And again, I truly, and I hate to keep harping on this, but it's just one of those things for me. I feel like less is more. And I think the Big East, for an example, they have put themselves in a position where, you know what, they can be extremely picky as far as who they want to add to their fray because I mean, there's been talks, about Big East expansion as well. It's not going to happen now, clearly, because they just got their new media deal. But if the Big East were to go out there and add another school, I feel like it would be like a who's who school from either the East or the Midwest that they could add to their fray. A solid basketball program. I'm just going to throw this name out there, like a Dayton, for an example. Okay, I know Dayton didn't have a strong year this year, but for the most part, they've been like one of the top teams in the Atlantic 10 in recent years. Something like that. But to me, again, like the proposed or talked about merger, it screams of desperation. And like in life, when you're desperate, you tend to make bad moves. And I think that is what has happened to the ACC because a lot of their moves to try to keep up with the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the SEC, they've been out of desperation. Whereas the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 have all made calculated moves. Because if you're the SEC and you sit down,
I would take the Big 12 out of that calculated move.
well,
I
well,
think
well, well, well,
they
well no,
actually,
no, no, because like there's there's something behind it, but like I'll get to that in a moment. But if you're the SEC You sit back and say, okay, Texas and Oklahoma want to join. Two football brands, two solid basketball programs, two solid baseball programs because you know Texas is consistently going to the College World Series.
Mhm.
Okay, we're on point. If you're the Big Ten, and they had to talk about this, adding USC and UCLA, but they're like, okay, get the California markets. We got SC, we got UCLA. Let's bring some people in with them. Let's bring in Oregon and Washington once, you know, the original Pac-12 folded. Even the Big 12, even though that the Big 12, and this is why I'm saying this, even though that they don't have the brands of the Big Ten or the SEC, Brett Yormark, their commissioner, sat back and said, "Hey, you know what? I don't have the brands, but let me get the markets, and I want to be able to touch every single market in the country with my schools. They're not the best schools in comparison to the Big Ten or the SEC, but at least he had somewhat of a plan, and he wasn't like the schools that he added. They weren't out of desperation. It was calculated. Clearly, you know, he brought in Houston after Texas left and Oklahoma left. Okay, you needed another Texas school for like that region right there. Okay, you bring in UCF for the East. You bring in Cincinnati. Now that kind of helps out West Virginia a little bit from a travel aspect. And then, you know, you bring in Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and BYU. So, you know, it's not West Coast per se, but it's like the mountain region. So you've gotten your region aspects of it. The ACC is kind of like they literally got the scraps, as you were
Yeah.
saying, because it was like, listen, you had a desperate SMU, you know, who was trying to get back into a power conference because they've been trying to do that since the Southwest Conference folded. Okay.
Mhm.
And then you had Stanford and Cal who were so desperate that they took less money to join the ACC because they were simply trying to save, you know, their Olympic sports out there. Stanford has a
Right.
extensive athletic program. Okay. So, and it's like Stanford and Cal, they're like two fish out of water, you know, in the ACC. I really do think that Stanford and Cal should have stayed and tried to work with Oregon State and Washington State. My personal opinion, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. But at the end of the day, it's like there's no plan there. There is simply no structure. It's like when I see the ACC, it's like it's one of those football wise. It's like okay, if it's not Clemson, it's just like is there any program to really get excited there for? And it's like basically all the ACC had this year, basketball wise, was Duke, and it showed. And it's like even with North Carolina, a national brand, North Carolina has not recruited those top guys in quite some time. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Because it's like you look at it, and probably for like the last 10 years or so, even when Roy Williams was still there, Carolina wasn't really sending guys to the NBA like that, which is
No,
unheard
and
of.
even when they do get good guys, here's the thing that's crazy. They're leaving. When
Right.
have you ever heard somebody want to leave Carolina? Caleb Love is a perfect example. He balled out last night for Arizona. And you think about it, if he doesn't leave Carolina, they don't struggle like they've been struggling. So that's a crazy thing right there to me.
You don't leave Carolina basketball. It's like certain places you don't say no to. You know when they recruit you, Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, places like that. You simply don't say no to them. And North Carolina is not getting those guys right now, and that's a problem. You know what I'm saying? And it's like I mean, you figure team for team, the Big East is probably sending more guys to the NBA right now than the ACC is. I know, you know,
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Cooper Flag at the very worst is probably going to be a top three pick. You know, this year if he decides to come out, I think he will. And I think that injury in the ACC tournament kind of like sped up the thought process too.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But you figure for the most part, team for team, you've got more guys in the Big East going to the like getting drafted by the NBA than the ACC. So it's just simply not there, man. They got to do something. Like I said, and again, I hate to sound like like a broken record. I don't see full on merger, but I do see some type of working partnership together. And it's like the thing is, it's like it's got to be one of those things where if you're going to have some type of basketball merger, if you're going to have these teams play each other every year, you need to get the marquee games that are going to highlight your league. So you've got to have Connecticut play North Carolina,
Right.
Connecticut play Duke. You know what I'm saying? The Georgetown Syracuse, game is probably an easy one, but even like St. John's, um, North Carolina, because maybe bring back the Duke St. John's game. You know what I'm saying? Like that,
Mhm.
because that was a popular game for a while until like St. John's got so bad and like Duke was kicking their ass every year. But then at that point, everybody's kicking St. John's ass.
Right. They're
You know what I
terrible.
mean? Yeah. Okay. So it's things of that it's things of that nature. And I think looking back on it in hindsight, I think the perfect time to have done that was after Villanova beat North Carolina in 2016 because you go back to that game and everybody basically picked North Carolina to win that game. All right. And it was one of those where like North Carolina basically left the floor stunned because Villanova outplayed them for that entire game and they won. You know what I'm saying? And it was like two of the biggest upsets that I've seen in in the national championship game, involve the ACC and the Big East. 99 Duke and Connecticut, 2016 Georgetown and not Georgetown, Villanova and North Carolina. And at the end of the day, I just feel like people don't respect the Big East basketball wise like they should. And and it's just I think, at least and this is just my thought process. I'm not in that room, but I think, the people that are there, they know that and they use it to their betterment. And like I said before, I think when this whole realignment thing, hit the Big East in 2013, I think they were completely done with the basketball schools. I think the only reason why Connecticut is back in the Big East is because they came back on their hands and knees begging to get back in, and they were one of the originals. If this was, Connecticut State or something like that was trying to get into the Big East, they would have said thanks, but no thanks. And, even Connecticut before, they tried to get into the ACC and the ACC told them no. Okay. So it's one of those where, because, you know, it's one of those where it's a smaller market. It doesn't, and that's the problem. A lot of times people are looking at the market aspect. They're not looking at, what a school could bring value wise to your league. In Connecticut, could they have brought value to the ACC? Possibly, definitely not from a football standpoint. And that's what hurt them, when they're trying to get to the Big 12 last year, because basically, Brett Yormark was all for it. Everybody else in the Big 12 was like, thanks, but no thanks, because basically the Big 12 was going to have to do a GoFundMe for
Right.
7 years, to give UConn the funds to build a satisfiable football stadium. And at the end of the day, when you think about UConn football, what do you think about? There you go. you know,
Darius Butler was the first and only person I could think of, honestly.
you, listen, him and like the brother of Aaron Hernandez. I can't remember his name. I know he
Yeah.
was did that, and that's about it. So it's like basically, they play on a high school field because, when you think about UConn athletics, you think about both their men's and women's programs, like I said. So honestly, if I were Connecticut, and I know they're not going to do it, I think they should do football wise or what some other schools have done. They said, you know what, screw it. Let's go back to the FCS level and call it a day. I know like in the old Big East, they were trying to get Villanova to come up to the FBS level. Villanova has a very strong FCS football program, okay? But nonetheless, Villanova was like, thanks, but no thanks. Your problem is not my problem. And I think, again, some of those people that are still the power brokers in that room for the Big East, they were there in 2011, 2012, and 2013 when this hit the fan, and they were like, and they're basically like, you know what, screw football. That's y'all's issue. I still think the Big East, of course, is heading in the right direction. Connecticut, they're going to bounce back from this. Okay, I mean, you can't go out there and win every year, especially that they've sent talent. to the NBA. St. John's ain't going nowhere because between the NIL money, Rick Pitino in New York City, and now you've got all the bandwagoners like Spike Lee, coming out to support the Johnnies. They're gonna be okay. I think the next big step there's two next big steps for the Big East. Who's gonna get the Villanova job, and then how soon can Georgetown get things turned around with Ed Cooley? They were much better this year than they were last year. Once you get those four originals into the mix, you're good. And like I said, it should just be an alliance. It's like, you know what? Let's work together as far as scheduling and stuff like that. But I simply don't see everybody being on the same page. Too many mouths to feed, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You got to get on the same page if you're going to make a merger like that happen. I mean, somebody's got to take the back seat. It's got to be a situation where, anytime there's a merger, every company is going to have, multiple CEO at this side, CEO at this side. But both of them are not going to be the CEO going
No.
forward. There's going to be one de facto person. So if that is something that they do, that's something they're going to have to figure out.
And
Now,
and,
to
and
your point about the Big East not getting the respect that they deserve when it comes to looking at stuff, breaking it down resume wise, putting this person, this team at this seed or this person gets in, so to speak. I think that's another reason why they even consider this because now you add a Carolina, you add a Duke to the schedule, you get a chance to beat both of them down in Tobacco Road during the regular season or
yeah.
in the Greensboro Coliseum during the ACC tournament on the route, en route to going to the semifinals or the finals or whatever the case may be. Now that strengthens your resume. So I think they're looking at it from that too. Same with the ACC, they're looking at it from that too, where they're not getting the respect. So now adding those Big East teams, I think they both help each other mutually in that aspect. And again, like I said, the other different ways that I think they help each other. The last point that I'm going to kind of make before I kind of go to why I don't think it will work
Hmm.
is here's the thing that I think, and I can be a conspiracy theorist at times. I think that they secretly hope that they're going to do something collectively that both struck out independently. And I say independently because I'm talking about Notre Dame. I'm talking about finally getting Notre Dame to want to join a conference football wise
Hmm.
and really bring this home for everybody. Think about this. If Notre Dame finally decides to be in conference football, it not only strengthens the ACC football wise, but now it makes the Big East relevant football wise. Now, I don't think Notre Dame's going to do that, but I think that there's some rumbles in there. Hey, you guys tried it your way and we tried it our way, but maybe let's try to make it happen collectively because what that now does is that's going to open up the floodgates for everybody, recruit wise, financially. Like it's just the faucets are gonna turn on just to overflow them and hopefully make them now compete with the Big Ten, so to speak, for that number two spot, because that automatically pushes them past the Big 12 in both sports, in my opinion, and now has them, like I said, knocking on the door, making that Big 12 thing happen. I don't know what they can say to Notre Dame to make them consider that.
Hmm.
I have no clue, but I think that someone is talking about that.
Listen, I'll tell you like this. Notre Dame will never join a conference. And if they were to join a conference, it darn sure won't be the ACC. I think this past college football playoff was a prime example of that because Notre Dame came out of that thing, in spite of losing to Ohio State, they came out of that smelling like a rose because you figure Ohio State get into the championship game. They had to split that money with all those other programs in the Big Ten. Notre Dame got all of that money for each round, and Notre Dame pocketed it all because they didn't have to share it.
That's true.
And that's
But
why that alone, I think Notre Dame would never join. On top of that, Notre
here's
Dame is
why they kind of have to, though.
They won't. They won't. And I'm gonna tell you why. Notre Dame has been very shrewd because when they joined the Big East, they joined the Big East for every single sport except for football.
Mhm.
And had they have joined the Big East, because the Big East was trying to get them to join for football, um, it probably would have saved the Big East. And it's the same thing with the ACC because Notre Dame is very smart. They schedule 5 games football wise with the ACC every single year. If they were to do 6 or more, they would have to join the league. Now, Notre Dame gets a cut of the ACC money from ABC, ESPN by doing that. Plus, they have their own network with NBC, and they don't have to share any of that money with anybody. They've clearly shown, guess what? We're still going to be able to make the college football playoff because we're Notre Dame. And I mean, when you're talking about brands, there's not a lot of football programs in the nation that have a bigger brand than Notre Dame. And again, the fact that they got all of that money from the playoff and they don't have to share it with anybody, they're not going to do it. Notre Dame is kind of like the Big East from the standpoint that the ACC needs Notre Dame more than Notre Dame needs the ACC. That's what I'm saying. That they will never join, man.
I agree to a certain extent, but I
Uh huh.
also disagree
Okay.
because here's what Notre Dame is missing. Notre Dame's missing something huge that they've been missing for years,
Mm-hmm.
and that is phenomenal athletes. They have no problem recruiting good, solid meat and potato football players, but
Mm-hmm.
they cannot get athletes anymore. Not since Rocket Ishmael have they really had a just unbelievable athlete. And to me, that's what stands in their way of doing what they want to do and doing what they're supposed to do. And that's actually winning national championships.
That
Every time they play a school that has phenomenal athletes, the
like
talent level is so overwhelming.
yeah, like listen, when they face the Ohio States and the Alabamas of the world, you do see it. But it's just like the thing for Notre Dame, it's like the academic standards
Mhm.
that are in place to get into that school. That's one of the things that like,
Definitely.
that hinders them from that aspect. Because you make a great point about that, but like they have such high academic standards to get in there. That's one of the things. And it's like Notre Dame, they're not going to come off of that either.
No, they're not going to change that. But
Nah.
I think again, like when you think of big conferences, like I said, with the sports intertwined the way that they are, the best
Hmm.
athletes all go to the same schools. So if you
Right.
want to get some of those top athletes, if you want to get some guys that are, running, sub 4.40s,
Hmm.
you're gonna have to kind of change something. And I see them possibly changing that maybe way more before they would change the academic standards. I don't think they're going to do it, but
Nah.
I think that somebody in the ACC is brainstorming this up that, hey, if we do this, if we make a super conference, so to
Hmm.
speak, Notre Dame may finally say, hey, you know what? We've got roots and ties to both of these conferences. If there
Hmm.
ever were a conference we would join, it would probably be this one.
They wouldn't do it, and I'm gonna tell you why. They're getting that NBC money, and let's just say, just for the sake of argument, let's just say NBC, didn't want to talk turkey with Notre Dame anymore, which I highly doubt. Okay,
No, it'll
it's
never happen.
like especially after the season that they just had. There's a lot of networks, there's a lot of streaming platforms out there that would give Notre Dame a boatload of money to televise their games. And again, they are in the unique position where they don't have to share that with anybody. So it's like that right there, money talks, everything else walks. And again, it goes back to the thing. The more schools that you have, the more mouths that you have to feed. It's like when the Big Ten going back when the Big Ten added teams, it was one of those where like they either looked for markets or they looked for brands. And it's like, again, bringing in a Rutgers. Rutgers has what? How much football heritage do they have? Not a lot, okay?
Right.
But they were able to sell themselves on having the New York market. That helps the Big Ten out with their media. So yeah, you got another mouth to feed, but how much more money are we getting, from, that mouth? What are they bringing to the table? Same thing with Maryland, same thing with SC and UCLA, because you're getting the LA market as well. So you bring in more mouths to feed, it's got to make sense to everybody. And it's just like, I mean, Val Ackerman has been tremendous for the Big East. I mean, I didn't think, okay, that the Big East was going to get another phenomenal commissioner like Dave Gabbett. Val Ackerman is in that category because the Big East is Dave Gabbett's baby. Okay, the original Big East. And then, of course, it was Mike Tranghese, and Mike Tranghese kept it going for as long as he could. And then he was like, he exited stage right. I can't do this anymore. But Val Ackerman has been tremendous for the Big East. I simply don't see her being able to convince those 10 non-football schools to go out there and fix something. Because I'll tell you like this, if it was a situation where if UConn said, you know what, we need this, I think it would be a scenario where the Big East would tell them deuces. I really do. Because the thing is, it's like UConn, they've lost money with their football program. Their money makers are their basketball programs, both men's and women's. I mean, just to give you an idea, UConn's women's program took like two steps back when they were in the American Conference. And I mean, you
Mhm.
think about that. I mean, Gino Auriemma has been as dominant can be. And now, of course, UConn's women are back in the Big East Conference. And now, guess what? They're starting to get, those top players again. And of course, Gino's starting to get his team to the Elite Eight, to the Final Four again, with the likes of South Carolina and other dominant women's programs like that. So it's one of those where I simply don't like, and again, I hate to sound like a broken record. I simply don't see it being beneficial, for the Big East from that standpoint. You made a point before, as far as, and it's a great point, as far as the ACC needing to make the Big East an offer that they can't refuse. All right, Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner right now, I'm gonna call him Stretch Armstrong because the thing is like he's all over the place trying to keep this thing together. And when you're going in so many directions at once, trying to keep something together, it's not going to work. You figure Clemson and Florida State wanted more money. How did he do that? He got SMU, Stanford, and Cal to agree to less money for like the first 5 to 7 years that they're in the league. Okay. Now you have this thing where like basically if Clemson or Florida State or any of these teams get to the college football playoff, they get a bigger cut. Or like basically, if you make it further in the NCAA tournament, you get yourself a bigger cut. Now this new settlement that's about to come down the pike with Stanford, well, not with Stanford, with Clemson, Florida State, and the ACC over the grants of rights. You know what I'm saying? It's like how many different, and now like like you're talking about a possible, basketball merger. How many different ways, can one guy, be twisted? And so it's like I'm looking at it again from a leadership standpoint. When conferences go under, it's from a lack of leadership. The Big East has better leadership right now than the ACC. All the other power football conferences have much better leadership than the ACC. I think they are hanging on by a string, and I think it's one of those where, and I'm coming at you with this from a football aspect because I've talked about it before, is that the SEC and the Big Ten, they are both, because you mentioned 20 before, and I've talked about that number as well. But I think both the SEC and the Big Ten are at a point now. Hey, they're only going to add a school or schools if they absolutely have to. Because think about it. Stanford and Cal wanted to be in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten told them no. That's why they ended up in the ACC.
Mhm.
So it's one of those where they can be extremely selective. And my point that I'm trying to make is this. I think they're just sitting back and like, hey, you know what? just let the ACC allow the ACC to like implode on their own. Because just throwing this out there, just for the sake of argument, let's say 5, 10 years from now, the ACC does fold. How does that affect the Big East? It really doesn't. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like the Big East is still going to be a basketball conference,
Hmm.
regardless. And I think the Big East is going to be around because they know what their niche is. They know how their bread is buttered. They're not trying to be cute with it. The ACC, they're trying to keep up with the Joneses, and I think at some point it will ultimately be their detriment to it. But nonetheless, if you're the Big Ten, if you're the Ace and the SEC, because the Big Ten, it's like they're just sitting up there, both of them like two dons, like two, both of their commissioners are kind of like, two mob bosses that have just like come together and just like, you know what? We have this imaginary line that we're not going to cross with one another. You know what I'm saying? We're just going to take care of our business. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, ACC folds. Big Ten and the SEC are going to sit back and say, you know what? We're going to have our pick of the litter as far as like, yo, who we want. And that's the way that it would be. I think and I've talked about this before, I truly believe that if the SEC got to 20, it would probably be like Virginia, North Carolina, maybe a Florida State, somebody like that. But the problem is this, and this is why I think Florida State stuck because the SEC has already told them no because Florida does not want them in the SEC. On top of that, again, like the point I made before, they're kind of like to the point like we have too many mouths to feed as it is, and they're looking at the ACC schools like this. What value would you bring to our league? So again, I just think they're stuck, man.
Yeah, I mean, if the ACC doesn't make this move, they will fold in the next 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, which
They
is
will.
why they
They will.
have to make this move. And they basically, when you're in a situation like that, when it comes to negotiating,
Hmm.
the Big East has all the chips. So they're gonna make sure if they're any good at negotiating, they're gonna make sure that they negotiate a deal that is beneficial for them.
Yep.
Now, if they don't make the deal, then they have to live with the what ifs
Yeah.
because what if we cost each one of our programs 50 million, $100 million, whatever that number is? What if we did that because we didn't want to budge off of our stance? So that's a big thing right there. If the ACC doesn't do this, they're screwed. And if the Big East doesn't do it, they don't necessarily lose anything in plain sight, but then the
Hmm.
what if game comes into play because now here's how I'm looking at it. If the ACC folds and you have those power teams from the ACC ultimately defecting to the Big Ten and the SEC, now the Big East gets even weaker basketball wise because now those two conferences become stronger basketball wise. So it's kind of like they've got to look at it also from the perspective of, hey, maybe we ultimately have a chance to save ourselves in the long run, 15,
Hmm.
20 years from now, if we go ahead and form up. It's kind of like, you're a kid in a neighborhood and there is, a group of bullies in the neighborhood and it's you and a couple other people and you get your ass kicked by yourself by these two or three dudes. This dude, same thing by these two or three dudes. So now you guys either come together to fight these dudes off or
Right.
you individually lose.
Right.
So it's a
Right.
situation like that. And now I'm going to go to why I don't think it would work unless
Mm.
there's some major moves going on. And the first thing is the number of teams, it's just way too many teams.
Yep.
So you're going to have to basically get rid of some teams. I think that sucks because now you're going to lose some traditional rivalries, Big East rivalries and ACC rivalries, because I don't see a situation where the ACC is going to say, we're merging, we're going to keep all your Big East teams, and we're only going to bring a handful of ACC teams to the table. I don't see a situation where the ACC is going to say, hey, we're bringing the majority of our teams, and you guys are only bringing a handful. It's going to have to be something mutual, and it's going to have to be, like I said, those top schools. So now you're going to have teams like NC State, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, kind of sitting on the bubble, so to speak, to stay in this new conference now.
Right.
Now, I think those schools, they've been in this conference. ACC's been around since the 50s, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
sounds about right.
like those schools have been in the ACC for as long as I can remember. So we're talking at
Right,
least from the 80s. So
right.
possibly, 60s, 70s before then. So I think that causes a huge uproar there. I
Yeah.
think then you also now run the risk of alienating alumni and fan bases with making those moves because college sports is all about the rivalries.
Absolutely.
More so than any other level of sports, it's all
Hmm.
about the rivalries. So I think you run the risk of now pissing off a lot of traditionalists and a lot of loyalists within your fan bases of these different schools. And now the backlash that could possibly lead to that, because now, hey, you may gain an
Hmm.
extra 50,000 casual fans because of these moves, because you have these hybrid matchups that you didn't normally get to see.
Hmm.
But now you may be alienating 500,000 people to gain 50,000 people. So I think that's a huge can of worms that could possibly be opened by doing that.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't think it would work because I think, it's one of those where I think we have seen where having half of your conference not have football programs and having the other half of your conference having football programs is a recipe for disaster. It's one of those where it's nice in theory, but from the long-term aspect, it doesn't work. I mean, Pac-12, the new Pac-12, for an example. Okay, we already know that they have Gonzaga on board. I'm going on record. I really do think once they get their media deal in place, I truly do believe that St. Mary's is going to be a part of that new Pac-12, because they're looking at it from a standpoint we want to compete basketball wise and football wise. And I think, when it's all said and done, I know the Pac-12 still has to get their media deal finalized, but I think they have better leadership in place than the ACC. That's just my personal opinion. So, but nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make with the new Pac-12, okay, so you've got 8 programs, 7 of them have a football team. I think St. Mary's is added at some point, but I think before that, they want to make sure, hey, let's at least get one more football member so
Mm-hmm.
that we have a certified legit conference going forward, and then we add the other pieces. Okay, you can get away with it with like this point I'm trying to make. You can get away with it with like one or two members of your conference not having a football program. The Big East currently has that right now with Connecticut. And again, the only reason why Connecticut is there is because Connecticut was one of the originals. And again, they came back begging, like, listen,
Mm-hmm.
we're screwed up in the American. It ain't working out. When you start talking about, okay, half of the league doesn't have a football program and the other half does, it's a recipe for disaster. You know what I'm saying? And it's like you can't sit up there, you can't make it like a situation like, like European soccer where it's just like, okay, you know what? You're getting relegated if you're like on the bottom half
Right.
of this league. I truly do think what they should do and what possibly might happen is, like I said before, you have a scenario where there is a scheduling agreement. So it's like, we kind of play, we play like each other like 3 or 4 times a year. And what you've got to do, you've got to make those marquee programs play each other. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to see Georgia Tech take on Providence.
Right.
Okay, nobody wants to see Butler take on Wake Forest. Nobody wants to see it. But if you want to sell people on North Carolina St. John's, if you want to sell people on Connecticut Duke, oh, guess what? People will buy tickets for that. You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying? So, I mean, it's kind of like, the Big Ten and the SEC from the standpoint that they formed an alliance, and it's to the point now with what they're talking about, a Big Ten SEC challenge for basketball, but also a Big Ten SEC challenge for football. And I think, and I think that works because, you still have both of your respective leagues. But, don't you think people, especially in this era with the college football playoff, and we started to see some of that this past season. I do remember Alabama going up to Camp Randall and taking on Wisconsin. And that was a game. I know Wisconsin wasn't as strong this year, but I know that was a game that people wanted to watch. But I mean, you think about it. How many people would watch during the regular season if Ohio State went down to LSU, or even this past season, we saw Texas go up to Ann Arbor and take on Michigan. Yo, you got to give. You know, granted, both these respective conferences still have their brands and stuff like that. I think it's something. It will be something along those pages. I don't. I really don't see a full on merger. You know what I'm saying? Because again, it wouldn't be beneficial to the Big East. But I do think some type of scheduling agreement would help because it's going to help you to like showcase your respective leagues. But then on top of that, it's going to strengthen your tournament resume because that's something that, we've heard, for the last couple of weeks. Okay, how many quad one wins does this team have in comparison to another team? What's their strength of schedule, compared to this team? And that's why, again, we had four ACC teams finish with winning records, and like three of them were 13-7, and only one of them made the NCAA tournament. That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I think back, to the days of Dean Smith at North Carolina. If you're telling me North Carolina won 13 tournament conference games, you're like, okay, North Carolina's gonna be like a 4 seed, or North Carolina's gonna be a 3 seed, in the NCAA tournament. So, it's things like that, man. But it's just like the ACC again. I can't harp on this enough. They have to sit down and ask themselves, what do we want to be? You
I
know what I'm
think they're a
saying?
little too late for that conversation.
And and, and and
I
that's a
think they
problem. And
should
that's a
have had
problem.
that kind of come to reality moment 15, 20 years ago. And I
Bingo.
think because they didn't, now they're in this situation. And ultimately, I really think that if, the scheduling thing, I think that can help in the
Hmm.
short term,
Right.
but I don't think it saves the ACC in the long term.
No.
And ultimately, if the ACC crumbles, it's sad to say the Big East is probably next.
I think the Big East would survive. I truly do, just from the standpoint that they don't have football there. You know what I'm saying? And they've shown that, they could survive basketball wise. And the
I
thing is,
think
it's like,
though, I think the ACC crumbling, I think that's their death blow in the long run because now you're the recruits. It's all about the recruits, and
right,
also now with the transfer
right,
portal, with the ACC crumbling, ultimately the Big 12, I mean, sorry, the Big 10 and the SEC
see,
are going to become stronger. By default, the Big 12 are going to get the lesser schools too.
naturally.
Now, when the SEC and the Big Ten become even stronger, that makes it even more difficult for the Big East to survive in the long run. That's what I think the problem is because now you throw, let's say, Carolina and Duke, they split up. One goes, let's say Duke goes to the SEC, Carolina goes to the Big Ten,
Hmm.
and so forth and so on. Now these conferences look even bigger and better. And now these Big East kids who are thinking about staying close to home are now thinking, hey, if I go to Duke and I've got to play Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky,
Hmm.
Ole Miss, these top teams, I
Right,
get to show my stuff a little bit more than playing Georgetown, St. John's, Providence, Villanova.
right.
I think that now I'm not saying right away this is going to happen, but
Hmm.
I think if the ACC dies in 5 to 10 years, I
Hmm.
think 15 to 20 years, the writing's on the wall where the Big East is basically going to go aside too. And then ultimately, the Big 12's now going to feel the wrath too. And it's going to come to a point where it's basically going to be two freaking conferences. And I would hate to see that.
Nah, listen, I mean, I would too, you know what I'm saying? And honestly, and I guess, I'm just waiting for the pixie dust to drop, but it was just like I would love in a perfect world for it to go back to being a regional thing. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that would be best for everybody involved, and just changing gears slightly real quick because competing in college in a sport. I was fortunate that all of our schools were within like the same 3 or 4 states. So long story short, you didn't have the amenities of a football program, yeah, but you could be on a bus and like the most you probably like a 4 hour bus ride. That's okay. Now we're asking kids to go cross country, to compete. And the thing is like once you eliminate football and basketball from the equation, the travel amenities for these other sports is not great.
No.
Okay. And I have a partner of mine who played baseball at Temple. And this was after Temple joined the American Athletic Conference. And he said, listen, it was not fun. Like one weekend you're in Tulsa, another weekend you're down in North Carolina at East Carolina and stuff like that. And again, baseball is not getting the same travel aspect. I mean, you're not getting a chartered flight to play college baseball. You know what I'm saying? You're just not.
Our
So
basketball team traveled over 20,000 miles this
right.
season.
And
Stanford was about 17,000.
and to your point, that's why there's rumors, and they're only rumors, okay, about Villanova going after Mick Cronin because Mick Cronin is not thrilled about UCLA's travel aspect.
Mhm.
Now that they're in the Big Ten, okay, because remember when Mick Cronin went to UCLA, they were still signed up for the Pac-12, and now you're talking about traveling to Rutgers, traveling to Iowa, traveling to Northwestern, and I can tell you like this personally. I have probably taken like three cross country flights in my life. And after like 2 or 3 hours, I was ready to get off of that plane. All right. It ain't fun. I know people personally who, flew, from New York to Hawaii. And that is a
Uh,
long flight to the
Crazy.
to the point that like this is pre 9/11. People were like just asking the stewardess for a pillow and a blanket and just like lay it out in the aisle because
Yeah.
they couldn't take it anymore. So I can't imagine, having to do that, multiple times a year. And it's not like an NBA situation where like, okay, you're on a chartered flight. If you're going to do a 5 game East Coast trip, okay, you're staying on the East Coast and then you go back home. It's like, okay, you might be at Rutgers and then you might be at Maryland and then you got to come back to Cali, and then the next thing you know, you're at Iowa, you're at Northwestern, or some stuff like that. Listen, that adds up very, very quickly, and it's like some kids, are going to sign up for it, but I feel like the others, there's others who are not either. So, I mean, the point I'm just trying to make is like, from that standpoint, something's got to give. I think but again, I think from a basketball standpoint, I think the Big East will be okay because it's, granted, a basketball program is not as lucrative as a football program, and that's the thing. A lot of people, at these schools are chasing that football money. I totally get it, but at the same time, it's easier to maintain a basketball program than it is a football program. You figure 15 scholarships, the wear and tear on the body is not the same. You don't have that many kids to take care of. You have a smaller coaching staff. You have a smaller travel setup. Granted, like I said, the money is not as lucrative, but it's still lucrative. You know what I'm saying? And you can go out there and take care of your business. I think what we're seeing, and of course, we're still in the infant stages of the transfer portal and the NILs. I think it's not just all on the schools. I think the alumni and the boosters are, they have to be on point as well. I think about, poor Shaheen Holloway, and I say poor Shaheen Holloway from the standpoint because he had Seton Hall in the custody NCAA tournament last year. They should have been a tournament team.
Yeah.
Okay. His team got decimated in the transfer portal to the
Hmm.
point that they finished last in the Big East. And basically, he wasn't crying per se, but he put it out there when the season was over. Like, listen, y'all need to get your NILs up as far as the alumni and stuff like that, because we got to do better in order to keep these kids. So I think in this current day and age, if you've got your NIL program on point,
Hmm.
you're going to be able to keep those kids. So that's why I do think that the Big East will be okay. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, I hear you, bro. But I'm just worried about the big bad monsters, man. I really am, man.
Well, I mean, again, I think that they're at the point, Big Ten and SEC, like I said, they can get their pick of the litter as far as who they want. Because let's just say, sake of argument, ACC does fold. They can both sit back together and be like, you know what? Who do we really want and who do we really
Mhm.
need in our fold? If I'm the SEC, I would take Duke and Carolina in a heartbeat. And I'll tell you why, because I feel like Duke and Carolina are a package deal because you can't have one without the other. It's kind of like peanut butter and jelly. You
Mhm.
just can't have one without the other. Okay, and Virginia would want to be in that mix, and then who would be the other team to give you 20? And I think if you're the Big Ten, okay, you know what? Do you want a Syracuse maybe? You know what I'm saying? Do you want a
There you
Boston
go.
College, for that Boston market? You know what I'm saying? And you could have that. And I'm going to say this real quick. The ACC, they've made some mistakes over the years. I know there are some people who feel like they made a mistake not adding Connecticut. I'm going to throw another school out there, and it's going to come back and hurt them. The ACC made a big time mistake not adding Memphis.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I know Memphis doesn't have the biggest market, but they have alumni with deep pockets. They have a strong basketball program. I think their basketball program would have flourished in the ACC. And I think, and this is just me, I'm hearing internet rumors out there. They're only rumors. But I think once this television deal, whenever the Pac-12 gets their television deal, I think they're going to target Memphis. I really do think they're going to circle back and try to get Memphis and somebody else from the American, and that of course would make that league stronger. And again, that's another fight for survival right there because you look at the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is trying to make themselves the best of the non-power five conferences. And
Mhm.
that's the direction that they're trending in because it's kind of like, well, all right, the group of five or group soon to be group of six, if you will, they're guaranteed, at least in this current agreement, they're guaranteed one bid for the college football playoff. So if you're the Pac-12, this new Pac-12, if you add one or two more big players, if you will, from that group of six, you've basically solidified your spot to say, hey, you know what? We're going to get that spot each and every year. You know what I'm saying? And again, Pac-12 has better leadership, in my opinion, than the ACC right now. And again, that is why that's going to be the detriment because Val Ackerman, strong basketball mind. And for the most part, with the Big East, they've always had strong basketball minds leading their league. And that is something that's at the forefront. And again, that's why I think they survived this. The ACC, they're gonna do everything possible. I think the Big East is going to keep their brand, but I think the Big East is also open for business from the standpoint of saying, hey, let's talk partnerships. Because again, like I said before, they've got their agreement with the Big Ten. They have the Big Ten Big East Challenge. So basically every year we see Marquette play Wisconsin, Xavier's in that mix, you name it. So, just make it worth their while. But I think when it's all said and done, I think both leagues will stay separate, but it's kind of I look at it like this. You can never have enough ways to make money as long as it's certifiable. You own stocks, you own real estate. Okay, you might have like a partial stake in a business. Three different things that are giving you different streams of income. And I think that's the way that Val Ackerman's looking at it. If they talk about something beneficial, bring it on.
No, yeah. I mean, like I said at the beginning, it's got to be beneficial for them. I
Hmm.
think the ACC, if they don't do it, it's going to be detrimental for them. And I just see it as the beginning of the end of college sports as we know it. I mean, Pac-12, they basically, to liken this to an individual program, the Pac-12 as a conference basically took the death penalty and are now basically rebuilding themselves from a death penalty situation.
Right.
And the ACC is basically probably looking at the writing on the wall saying, hey, we're next. We got to do something. So I just don't want to see it to where we basically have two monster conferences and everybody else is just on the outside looking in.
Brother, listen, it's steamrolling that way because I mean, you just look at this year's NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
I think, having all of the teams, from power conferences, it takes away a little bit of the luster, if you will. Look, the games have still been exciting as far as I'm concerned, but
Yep.
the upsets, especially those first round upsets,
Mhm.
are what make the NCAA tournament. Seeing a 12 beat a 5 to me is not an upset because we see it
No.
every year. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? But like once you get a 13 knocking off a 4 or like a 3 getting knocked off
There
by
you
a
go.
14, that's huge.
Right.
Okay, you know what I'm saying? We didn't have it this year, and I think due to the fact that the teams at the top were so strong, and of course, why were some of those teams so strong? The transfer portal. I
Yep.
mean, you look at Florida Atlantic. They made the NCAA tournament 2 years ago and their head coach is at a Power Four school, and three of their key players from that team are at Power Four schools right now. And of course, those three players are still playing in the NCAA tournament. So that just let
Hmm.
you know. You think Florida Atlantic didn't have a good team? They absolutely
Right.
did. You know what I'm saying? But listen, I think both of those leagues, ACC and Big East, I think they'll be okay for the short term. But I think the Big East has a better chance to be okay for the long term because they have their act together basketball wise. The ACC doesn't have their act together football wise. They don't even have it together basketball wise anymore
No,
either, man.
neither one. Neither one.
No, because like I think about it. I think about what the ACC conference was about 25 years ago. I mean, you had Duke, you had North Carolina, you had a stronger Wake Forest program. You had a strong Virginia program. You had an extremely strong Maryland program because, I mean, Maryland was right there with Duke. Okay, and I
Hmm.
think I think back to that 2001 season. Duke and Maryland played each other 4 times that year,
Hmm.
and Duke won 3 of those games. Most importantly, in the at the Final Four. But it was one of those where Maryland was right there in every one of those games. And I think in most of those games, Maryland had a lead. I think that was a year where Maryland had I think they blew the 10-point lead at home with like a minute
Hmm.
left or something like that. Yeah. But when you thought about the ACC in those days, you thought about strong basketball. Georgia Tech's program was so strong back in those days. Bobby Crimmins, as an example, Bobby Crimmins was a New York area guy, and Bobby Crimmins consistently got kids from New York City to uh to go down to Atlanta. He got Stephon Marbury. Before that, he got Kenny Anderson. Even once
Hmm.
upon a time, he had John Sally. All of these are New York area guys. You know what I'm saying? They're not getting that anymore. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I mean, the ACC's got to go back to the drawing board. That's just my final thought on it now.
They were at one point in time arguably either the top basketball conference or the second best basketball conference. And
Absolutely.
and without question, in my opinion, the second best football conference in the country.
Mhm.
And now they are at the bottom of the barrel essentially in both.
Yeah, and I mean, I think basketball wise, it's going to be a little bit interesting now because you get Will Wade to take over at NC State, which was like the worst kept secret, going. And then of course, Will Wade is basically bringing his entire McNeese State team with him to the ACC in North Carolina State. That's going to be very interesting. Um, Virginia's getting Ryan Odom, and of course, Ryan Odom wherever he goes, he wins. I mean, you think about it, he was a head coach at UMBC when they became the first 16 seed to knock off a one when they knocked off Virginia. I think it was 2018. And then, of course, what he has done most recently at VCU. So now he's staying right in that state and he's going from Richmond to Charlottesville. So I think that is good. Those two moves right there are going to help the impact of that conference basketball wise. And I think it didn't get talked about enough this year because Louisville was one and done. But the turnaround that Pat Kelsey had at Louisville this year, because Kenny Payne and Chris Mack both ran that program into the toilet. Okay, after Rick Pitino. So I think if Louisville continues to trend upward, North Carolina State gets their stuff together. Um, and Virginia, turns things around. And I think North Carolina is going to have a bounce back year because if you followed the tea leaves, if you will, from Hubert Davis's time as North Carolina's head coach, they have a so-so year and then they bounce back and have a strong year. I think North Carolina does that. They're going to have to hit the portal, in my
I think that
opinion.
dude's on the hot seat.
Listen, definitely, he is. I truly do believe that. You know what I'm saying? But I think that's why I think they're going to be active in the portal because you lose R.J. Davis, who was a phenomenal player for North Carolina. They never replaced Armando Bacot,
Hmm.
because I mean, you're talking about one of the top rebounders in the ACC while he was there. So I'm like, if you're Carolina, you've got to hit the portal because, you know, North Carolina doesn't have they don't go to playing games to get to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
North Carolina does not come into the NCAA tournament as an 11 seed. It's like at Carolina, North Carolina is a basketball program where anything less than a 4 seed for the NCAA tournament is a disappointment. Okay, there's just like certain places like that.
Right.
North Carolina's in that mix. So you figure I can't even tell you the last time that they went outside of the North Carolina family to get a coach because even the guys who did not work out, they were still Carolina guys. They were still
Yep.
guys who played, at Chapel Hill. So, but nonetheless, I totally agree with you about Hubert Davis being on the hot seat. That's why I think North Carolina hits the transfer portal. So when it's all said and done, I think the best way to elevate and expose your conference is getting multiple ranked teams, and having those multiple ranked teams play each other. And I mean, that's what helped the SEC this year in basketball is the fact that, you basically were seeing two ranked teams facing each other every single night. Same thing with the Big Ten. And, the Big East even gave you, more of that, in my opinion, this year than the ACC did. So like you've got to go out there and you've got to showcase your league front and center. I mean, other than Cooper Flag and that strong freshman class at Duke, what did the ACC offer you this year? Not a lot.
Nothing. Nothing
Nothing.
at all.
And I mean, it was one of those where like football wise, Clemson had to fight scrap and claw to get into the college football playoff. But I'm like, anybody who watched Clemson this year knows that Clemson and watched Clemson the last couple of years, they have not been the same Clemson that we saw when they were winning championships, with the likes of Deshaun Watson and quarterback, for an example. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, I know SMU was the other ACC program that got to the college football playoff, but I'm like, listen, it's just like they didn't push the needle for a lot of people. And like I listen, I said this about the college football playoff as soon as they expanded to 12 teams. It's basically going to be the Big Ten SEC challenge, and that's exactly what it was, and that's what it's
Yep.
going to continue to be. And I think you've got, I would say you've got a little bit more wiggle room with the NCAA tournament, just due to the fact that you have more teams. And then on top of that, I know that the NIL has been a game changer, but there's still room for the Cinderellas. Okay, so you still have that aspect. So it's not quote unquote the exclusive province. I know things are working out a little bit different this year, but it's not the exclusive province, if you will, of both of those leagues. So I think you have a little bit more wiggle room. But the bottom line, like we said before, the ACC, they are they're that 1992 Honda Civic that's trying to keep up on I-95 with a 2024 Ferrari.
Hmm.
It's not even close. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, I mean, if that Honda Civic, tries to keep up with the Ferrari, next thing you know, you're going to see piston rings flying out of there. The transmission is going to go, you name it. And the Ferrari's only going to be doing 70.
Right.
Okay. You know what I'm saying? That's basically what they're up against.
No, you hit that right on the head because, in my opinion, the ACC is stuck in past times. They're trying to hold on to too much, in my opinion, tradition. while all the other conferences, and when I say that, I basically mean the three that are making moves, they're adapting with the times and they're staying current, which is
Right.
why they're continuing to, flourish, and the ACC is continuing not to.
Yeah. Listen, like my final thought, like I said before, Big Ten is focused on brands. SEC is focused on brands. The Big 12 has focused on regions. The ACC is just focused on adding teams. That's going to be the detriment. It's like even the Big East. The Big East had a plan, like I said, with the seven non-football schools that stayed in the Big East. They all got together and they said, "Hey, let's get to 10 and let's take the three strongest basketball brands that we could find that are Catholic schools like us, and let's make it work." And you figure as soon as I heard it was announced, okay, they're bringing in Xavier, they're bringing in Butler, and they're bringing in Creighton. I said, you know what? That's gonna work. Whereas when the ACC decided to add SMU, Stanford, and Cal, I was just like, okay. Or like even, when the ACC decided to add Syracuse and Pitt, I was like, this ain't gonna work. And the reason why I was like, I've seen what happened with Virginia Tech, Miami, and Boston College. I saw enough of it to realize, yo, it's not gonna work. So it's just like, even with the SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma, I was like, okay, that's gonna work. You know what I'm saying? And it was like, with SC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, going to the Pac-12. I mean, to the Big Ten. I was like, it
I
definitely
wasn't
worked.
sure about that one.
Well, I put it like this. You figure from a basketball standpoint, okay, we already saw Oregon, win the Big Ten in year one. They had a solid team. Then they got to the playoff and got smoked by Ohio State. Basketball wise, we saw Oregon get to the tournament. Basketball wise for UCLA, it's going to be very interesting because I'm not holding my breath on it, but I'm like, if Mick Cronin was like, you know what, screw it, I'm leaving and I'm just going to a basketball school, I would not be surprised because he's already been outspoken about things. The wild card in it, is Washington, and I think USC. I know a lot of people ain't happy with Lane Kiffin out there, but the thing is, it's like basically anytime these coaches get these 10-year deals, they don't have to work for their supper anymore.
Right,
But
right.
but it's like, still I think in the long term, I think it works. You know what I'm saying? For all of them. But again, all of those other leagues, they had a plan in place, man. It's just like, you know, there's no plan. There's no plan in place. You know what the ACC is? The ACC is a more powerful Atlantic 10 conference because the Atlantic 10, they're another one.
Mhm.
They're just adding basketball programs just to add basketball programs. They don't mix, they don't match, they don't mesh. And the A10 is gone from being a league that could send like 4 or 5 teams to the tournament every year. Granted, most of those teams are gone now, but nonetheless, it's basically now to the point with the A10. If you don't win the conference tournament, you ain't getting it.
Yeah.
And that's
So,
basically, and that's basically what the ACC is doing.
yeah, they're trending that way for sure.
Yeah, man. Listen, man, we covered a lot. And like I said, man, I was chomping at the bit to talk about this. And folks, I'm going to tell you something right now. Mark's going to back this up for me. We just threw out the topic to one another. There was no previous, okay, you know what? You take this stance on this, you take this stance. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? We just said, yo, let's talk Big East, ACC, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah,
Okay. And we just polyed, we went back and forth, on this for nearly 2 hours. This is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of people. Hopefully, y'all enjoyed what you heard and saw on this edition of the podcast. But I think, like we always try to talk sports, but we always try to be mindful of the business of sports behind the scenes because sports is business, sports is entertainment, and there's a lot of money being thrown around. There's a lot more potential money that could be thrown around on different aspects as well. Mark, this was good work tonight, man.
yeah, man. It was a great show, man. I knew as soon as you threw that topic out, I knew it was gonna be a good one, man.
Listen, man, this was tremendous, man. And just before we sign off, man, because I know, every time we talk, you got some new business ventures. You got some new avenues that are opening up for you. Anything out there that you want to enlighten folks about right now, man?
Yeah, actually, website is kind of in the process of getting built now. Gonna have that up and running, and basically on the website, just gonna be showcasing a lot of the voice acting that I'm doing, and also gonna be throwing some links to podcasts and stuff like that. So definitely gonna have the 300 pounds of sports knowledge link on there, for you to, be able to branch out to a couple other people, man.
Yeah, you're talking about the voices and stuff like that. If we check this out, can we hear you doing like a Denzel Washington imitation or an Eddie Murphy imitation?
Oh no, see, I'm not really good with the imitations. What I'm
Okay.
really good at is just doing different characters and stuff like that. So,
Okay.
basically that's what I'm kind of cutting my teeth in right now is
All right.
basically working on a bunch of different characters, voices. I can do a little bit of everything. I mean, basically, I've got a half man, half wolf character that I do. Kind of sounds like this. And then I've got, another, I've got a bunch of different ones, bro. But once that website's going, I'm definitely gonna plug that on and people will be able to see a little bit of the variety of voices I can do.
Listen, nah, man. I was just wondering if you're going to be like Eddie Murphy impersonating Tracy Morgan talking about eating four cheese lasagna.
No, oh, that was hilarious, man. Only eat four cheese. That was too good, man.
Yeah, man. Nah, but listen, man. There's want to take this time to thank all of y'all once again for checking us out. If you like what you heard and saw on this podcast, please feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. Got a lot more to talk about this week. I've been giving y'all a division by division breakdown of the upcoming MLB season. Got one more division to go. That's the American League West, as well as the playoff projections for this upcoming MLB season. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Also, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can always check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports. Like I always say, if you follow me, it's my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the Sports Depot 365 on Facebook, one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. You're more than welcome to check us out, and you're more than welcome to join as well. So, for my good partner, Mark Jenkins, this is William Martin signing off and saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.